Hello everybody, this is ManuS and welcome to another MTG Arena Contenders deck tech here on my channel. It's been almost a week since my Drool deck tech of the deck that I made it into the top 16 of the second ranked season in MTG Arena. And yeah, the video series blew up big. It already has over 5,000 views. That's like the most views I've gotten in this short amount of time on this channel so far, except maybe for my initial artifact introduction video long before it came out. So big thanks to everyone checking out the content and all the nice comments and people liking my content and appreciating the deck and so on. So yeah, thank you so much. I really like to see that the channel is growing since I'm covering Magic more and more, so that's amazing. And yeah, thanks to everyone that made it possible. So yeah, today I want to talk about a deck that I have been messing around with the last few days and had quite some good initial results, and also is something a little different and kind of cool and has some potential. So I want to share it with you guys to not only share like the decks that I'm like have 100% figured out and crushing everything, because then I couldn't do that much content for you guys. This is going to be a bit more of a thing that has potential and isn't 100% perfect yet, so just so you know what you're in for. Alright, before we dive into the deck, of course, you know the drill. Hit the subscribe button, turn on notification icon if you're new to the channel, and also please consider whitelisting YouTube on your adblock to help support the free content. That would really mean a lot. And now on to the deck. Okay, so the deck is basically a Hero of Precinct One Mardu aggro deck with reinforcements, Judith, and support cast. A similar list has managed to get a 8-2 record at the Pro Tour. I have had a version of this built on my account. Basically since Ravnica Legions came out, I just never could try it because I was short on so many duels. But yeah, a couple days ago I finally got the remaining duels and could mess around with it. And this is where I'm currently at, and the list has done quite well for me so far. Let me pull up my stats to just get a rough idea. I played it a bit on ladder and in some events. And yeah, my overall record right now is 11-5 between, I think, one traditional event where I think I went 5-1 or 5-0. Sorry about that. And a bunch of ladder games with prior versions of this and this version. Okay, so this is an aggro deck. It's a fairly greedy one. The mana base is possible in part due to Unclaimed Territory and the most common creature types in the deck being either warrior or human, mostly human. Like if you look here at the creature types, it's 18 humans and then a couple of warriors and a bunch of like soldiers basically. So those are like the three types that you tend to name most often, I guess. But mostly it's going to be human, and the rest is just going to be like honor cases, warrior for 1-drop, or soldier if you like a white for, say, Adanto Vanguard and Tajic. Okay, so the creatures that I'm pretty sure about are the 4 Dauntless Bodyguard and the Gutterbones. That gives us 8 1-drops with 2 attack, which is pretty important against control and combo like Nexus and Asper. Gutterbones is really nice because it gives you some staying power in grindy games like against Asper, or even like against Sultai sometimes and stuff like that, or just against like mono red where the games can become pretty grindy. Just does a lot of work for 1-drop. And Bodyguard is a bit unexciting turn 1, but it is a human, so it works with territory really well. And also, if you play it later, it actually is quite good because you can play it like on turn 3, for example, to protect the Hero of Precinct One, or even on turn 4 to protect the Judith or Tajic, which can be really nice, especially with Tajic protecting your other creatures from damage-based spells and stuff like that. There can be some nice utility here against sweepers and stuff like that. So keep that in mind. Then the other thing I'm 100% sure on is the 4 Hero of Precinct One. That's kind of one of the payoff cards of the deck. The tokens happen to play pretty well with Judith, also with Tajic's mentor, and especially with heroic reinforcements. Like if you go turn 2 Tajic, turn 3 one of the multicolors 3-cost cards, make a token, turn 4 you go heroic reinforcements, get another token, then the token gets haste immediately, so suddenly you have a really wide board with a bunch of 2/2 tokens attacking, and if you have a Judith out, the tokens are even 3/2s and so on, so it's a lot of damage, it's very explosive. And the other cards that I'm creatures that I'm very sure about are the 4 Judith. Judith is just really good. Unfortunately, her ping doesn't work with tokens, but they still get +1/+0, which is pretty good. And the ping just adds up damage, or just makes blocking for the opponent so much harder. So she's on a similar power level as Benalish Marshall, just with some different utility, basically. And I probably want at least 3 Tajic. I have considered a 4th and messed around with a 4th, but currently I decided against it, partially because we also have Mortify, so the deck doesn't get too clunky, and because as a 3/2 it trades with a lot of stuff, so it often dies the turn you play it if the opponent has creatures, which makes it a bit awkward. If it had 3 toughness, I would definitely play 4, the card would be really good. But yeah, it still lines up really well with Hero, for example. You can just play turn 2 Hero, turn 3 Tajic, attack, Hero becomes a 3/3, making it that much harder to block, so the opponent often trades with Tajic instead, and also gives you a token, and so on. And if you ever get to untap with Tajic, giving him first strike makes him pretty annoying to deal with, and the prevent all non-combat damage thing can come up as well, especially against the odd gate control with Gates Ablaze and Clarion, because then it only kills Tajic. Same against Fiery Cannonade sometimes. And the other creature that I definitely want is not really a creature, is Heroic Enforcements, and I definitely want 4. The card is really, really powerful in the deck. Pressures enough that often an on-curve turn 4 reinforcement just means game and overwhelms the opponent. Then I'm also pretty sure that I want at least 10 2-drops. Currently I decided on 3 Vanguard and 3 Tithe Taker. Let me explain why. The thing is, Adanto Vanguard is really good against the decks that it's good, but it's also pretty bad against the decks that it's bad. Like against Mono Blue, it's very embarrassing against their Tricksters. They can just Trickster it and eat it for free, which is awful for us. Also, paying for life can be problematic in races, and then it just trades with their 1/1s if you don't pay for life. So that's additional issues, but the Trickster one is the biggest one. Also against Mono Red, you don't really want to pay 1. It trades with Firebrands and stuff, and it also just dies for free to Chain Whirler, which is another issue. Those are the 2 matchups where it's the worst. Against Mono White, it's okay, but it still kind of trades with everything, and paying for life is also not something you can always afford. So especially against the monocolor decks, this is pretty lackluster. And Tithe Taker happens to be pretty good against all 3 of those. Against Mono Red, it's still not great, I would say, but it's solid and much, much better than Vanguard. Against Mono Blue, Tithe Taker is a pain for them. It makes all of their cards so awkward, and yeah, it also fights much better against Trickster, aside from the fact that Trickster now costs 3, which is really bad actually. So the effect actually matters quite a lot against Mono Blue, making this pretty good against Mono Blue. Against Mono Red, it's decent, and against Mono White, it's often like a hard 2-for-1. So, and against Esper, it's worse than Adanto Vanguard, but it's still decent. They both die to cry, and against other removal and sweepers, they are both pretty solid. Against Sultai, I think Vanguard is much, much better, but against Nexus, they are kind of close. This pressures a bit more, but the text on this actually is kind of relevant. Making their Root Snare cost 3, for example, can be really awkward when they're under pressure and stuff like that, which is why I decided on a 3/3 split. They both have different up and downsides against different relevant archetypes. So for now, I'm leaning towards 3 and 3 and 10 2-drops. And then we have the 2 Footlight Fiend. For most of the time, I had 2 Carnival Carnage, kind of as a shock replacement, because a lot of the things you really want to shock, you can just Carnival, like Lanova Elves, random Mono Blue and Mono White 1-drops, stuff like that. But shock is much worse against Nexus or Control, for example, where Carnage is pretty decent. and can even like win you the game sometimes against Esper, hitting the last 2 cards and dealing 3 to them, for example, can be really powerful. So I kind of like that, but the card is still a bit so-so and doesn't play that well in the deck, and Carnage can be kind of clunky, and Carnival can be low impact, situational, and having a bit more 1-drops comes in pretty handy, especially with Reinforcements and Judith, and to a lesser extent with Tajic. So just being able to curve a bit more 1, 2, 3, I decided to try to Footlight Fiend. I, however, still like the bodyguards better than more Footlight Fiend, like for example the list from the Pro Tour that you saw. Especially with the territories that I think he didn't run, and that help a lot with the mana here. In terms of 2-drops, I considered and tried cards like Fireblade Artist, but Artist is kind of awkward with territory if you want to also play Gutterbones, because if you go turn 1 Warrior or Skeleton with territory, you can't play Fireblade Artist on 2. Also, basically against any deck with creatures, Fireblade Artist is pretty underwhelming since it's just a 2/2, so it trades with everything. Even like 2/1 1-drops out of like mono white and stuff. So it's just not a very good 2-drop, I think. And the sack ability doesn't really come up much. Basically has to be a game where you somehow stalled out and somehow have a bunch of creatures, and they are enough to like slowly burn out the opponent, and that didn't really come up, and I don't see it likely to happen, so I gave up on that. The Priest kind of seems to kind of pull against what the deck wants to do. The let me show you. This guy, Priest of Forgotten Gods. It's also really bad when it's bad, like against Esper or Nexus, for example. This is pretty bad. It's also very fragile. Against mono red, it's not good. Like against White Weenie, it's okay. Against mono blue, it's pretty solid. Potentially, if they don't have too many creatures. Against Sultai, it's not that impressive. Like all in all, I just didn't like it much and don't miss it at all. The other card that is interesting to me basically is Pitiless Pontiff. But the thing is, I want this deck to be really aggressive and curve out, and then Pontiff is basically just a just a 2-mana 2/2, because if you want to curve out and play like a Judith or a Tajic, on turn 3 you want to play them before combat, so when you attack you can't even like threaten to activate this. I think the card is actually quite appealing, but it also has the same tension with like turn 1 Bodyguard or Gutterbones. Like if your turn 1 land is territory, you basically can't play this on turn 2, and it's even stronger here because it applies to all the 1-drops, not just to Gutterbones. So yeah, this in the end just doesn't really work. There might be a different deck that is more like kind of Mardu Aristocrat style, where this works and is pretty good. But yeah, in this deck I don't think it really fits. And yeah, Oligarch basically is a worse, harder to cast Tithe Taker that triggers Hero of Precinct One and doesn't have the nice text that Tithe Taker has, so that's not really an option either. And yeah, there are not really any other considerations, I think. Right now, like I considered Freebooter, but it's not aggressive enough, and you're so aggressive that you don't really need the disruption against Nexus and stuff, so that doesn't seem very appealing either. And yeah, Footlight Fiend is really easy to cast. You have 12 sources without the territory, so you usually won't need to use territory on Devil, which would be kind of bad. So you can just play this turn 1 and then use territory turn 2 on like your white 2-drops if you had like a red-black turn 1 source, for example, and that sort of stuff. So yeah, just curving out and hitting your opponent hard is kind of the plan here. Then we have 4 Lightning Strike. I'm a really big fan of Lightning Strike in aggressive decks in Standard right now. There's not a whole lot you need to kill. You can't Lightning Strike. Wildgrowth Walker is one of the main things you really need to kill, and that's Lightning Strike. The few things you cannot kill that you might want to kill are basically Tempest Djinn and sometimes Drakes, but Drakes is not that popular, and also you're so aggressive that you can often just deal with Drakes in combat. Like if they block, Judith Ping finishes them off. You have some Mortifies. You can just go through them by by the time they drop, especially against the Phoenix version that only has 4 Drakes. So Lightning Strike not killing Drakes is not really a big deal. Like the thing that comes up the most is the odd Djinn, but they usually often play it protected anyway, so trying to kill the Djinn doesn't work that often, so you kind of just want to try and go around it and just punch through it with a wider board. And then this not killing it doesn't matter again as much, but this on 4 mana getting past a Spell Pierce and that dive down not stopping it actually means you can sometimes kill them with it, where if it was a removal, you would just, if it was a Lava Coil, you would just play it on a Djinn, they dive down, and you lose the game in a tight spot and stuff like that. So I've been very happy and impressed with Lightning Strike and Standard in aggressive decks. Like for example, as you saw, the Gruul deck has 4 Lightning Strikes, 0 Lava Coil main, and I think that's 100% correct and very important to the deck. And the same here, it's also like against control, finishing Planeswalkers, against Nexus, killing them a turn earlier sometimes and stuff like that. So yeah, Lightning Strike, prime removal, very flexible, never a dead card, might increase your clock by a turn and so on. And then we have 3 Mortify. Just because I wanted some additional removal. This also happens to be really good against Nexus. That's the main reason why I chose Mortify over, say, Cast Down, because it kills Reclamation. If you don't see many Reclamation decks, I could see just trying Cast Down, because the difference between the 2 and 3 mana is really big, actually. But the flexibility of this killing Reclamation, the Odd Search for Skanta, and sometimes like post-board being able to kill like a Lyra out of Esper control, for example, can matter, stuff like that. But all in all, I think Cast Down would be a better card if Reclamation is not something that you're worried about. It's also possible that a Nexus matchup is so good that you don't need Mortify for Reclamation, or that you maybe want to play like 2 Cast Down, 1 Mortify or whatever. But the fact that it's also a multicolor card for Hero is a nice bonus. But yeah, 3 mana is a lot for removal, especially in a deck like this. And having more 2s means you can more often go 2 2-cost spells on turn 4, or like a 2-cost and a 1-cost on turn 3, so that's something to keep in mind. So I'm not 100% sold on the Modifies. And then we have 22 lands, 12 Shock Duels, 6 Track lands, 1 Chapel, 3 Summit, 2 Retreat, slightly leaning towards the like red and black here, because we have a lot of red spells with Lava Coil and Strike, and also bring in some black spells early on like Duress and Drill Bit. But it's also possible that the third Summit should just be a second Chapel. But first of all, I don't own a second Chapel yet. Second of all, there is more red non-creatures than white. We have 7 white non-creatures, but we already have 8 red non-creatures in the main, and 6 more in the sideboard. So hence the leaning towards Dragonskull Summit over an additional Chapel or Retreat. So that's the main deck, basically. Now let's talk a bit about the sideboard. Also, yeah, Territory, big deal, gives us at least 12 turn 1 sources for all our 1-drops, and even up to 16 if push comes to shove for Footlight Fiend, if you really don't need the Territory for anything else, and somehow don't have any Shock Duels, which is almost never gonna happen. So it's like 12 turn 1 sources for each of those, which is nice. And yeah, sideboard, 2 Duress, 2 Drill Bit, kind of a split here. Duress is a bit better in the sense that you can sometimes play a turn 1 if you don't have another turn 1 play. And it's less conditional, but it doesn't hit everything. And Drill Bit just hits everything, can hit like a Hostage Taker or Lyra even out of Esper control, for example, where Duress couldn't. But I like the split because against mono blue, Drill Bit is harder to set up and you might not want to bring it in, but Duress is pretty good against mono blue, clearing the path for removal and stuff like that. So yeah, for now I like the 2-2 split, but I could see messing around in either direction and seeing if the deck can somehow work with 4 Drill Bit, because it's obviously a more flexible card, also being able to hit like the odd Crassus or Ooze out of a Nexus deck and stuff like that. But yeah, when you somehow cannot enable it, the card is really bad, so I'm currently on the split here. And then we have 4 Lava Coil, just kind of the go-to sideboard removal in red decks. It kills almost everything you need to kill, except for like Lyra basically, and activated Terramander, like Adapted Terramander. And that should usually not happen, plus we have the 3 Modifiers as well. and this is just very efficient, exiles Rekindling Phoenix, Arclight Phoenix, the odd creature and Soul Tie so they can't find it back, like White Cross Walker or Crassus or Hostage Taker, which can be pretty relevant. So yeah, just a really good universal card and very efficient at what it does. Then we have 2 Theater of Horrors for grindy matchups, especially against control. It's suffers a bit from the fact that Esper has Mortify, so it's not that great, but the fact that it can also like be a bit of a threat, ping the opponent. I had a spot where I finished off a Teferi that had to -3 under pressure, and I could just use this to ping the Teferi down. That's some really nice upsides here, and it's at least pretty cheap, so they only trade like even on mana with their Mortify, which is not that great, and they also have the creatures they need to kill. But it's the best thing that I could think of in this slot. Like something like Treasure Map is just way too dirty, and this is really powerful if it sticks. So it's not as hard of a threat as it might be in other matchups because of Mortify, but it's still a pretty good card. Then we have 3 Aurelias. They come in against other creature decks and like Soul Tie. Like against Soul Tie, Heroic Reinforcements is not that great. Neither is it against like Spell Pierces out of Mono Blue or like against Mono Red or Mono White, basically like other creature heavier decks. Sure, in game 1 where kind of everyone is just doing their thing, it's fine even in those matchups, but it's not ideal. It's just the best like kind of game 1 configuration, but against a fair share of decks you just want to take them out and put in Aurelias because they're kind of hard to answer. Like she doesn't die to cast down. She has 5 toughness against red removal, and like she flies against flying blue flying creatures and stuff. And not sure if I would bring in against mono blue. You might just not want any 4-drops against mono blue and just bring in a bunch of discard and removal. But especially against like mono white, mono red, and Soul Tie, this card is really nice. Pretty hard to deal with. Has immediate impact the turn she comes down, and then is really obnoxious after that. So kind of a nice transitioning against like bigger green mid-rangey creatures when it gets harder on the ground. You can just take to the skies with it. And then we have 2 Angress, the Flame Chained, also kind of a double duty card, comes in against control. They only have a few answers for it. It deals damage and grinds against them, which is really nice. Also can come in against like Drake decks if they are on Enigma Drake. And yeah, it also comes in against mid-range like Soul Tie because it just is a really nice grindy card that also advances our game plan. And in these longer, grindier games, the fact that it costs 5 is not that big of a deal, because even with your 22 lands, if the game goes longer, you're gonna hit your 5 lands eventually, and then having like 2 5-drops in a 22 land deck works pretty well post sideboard. It's not something that I would play main deck in a 22 land deck, but as a sideboard plan for matchups where the games go longer anyway and are more attrition based, having a bit pushed curve with a low land count can be quite beneficial to not flood out too much, because if you're not drawing a land, you're drawing a spell that you can play, so you'll eventually get to play the Angress, because you're either drawing lands that get you closer to Angress, or you get spells which let you do something else that turn. And Angress is kind of good whenever it comes down in most scenarios against these decks. Okay, so that's the deck list and the sideboard. Deck has been doing pretty well for me and feels kind of nice. It's still a bit rough around the edges and there's some room for improvement, I'm sure, but I like where it is right now, and yeah, just wanted to share it with you and discuss where I'm at with it and show it in action a bit to give you some more content. Some of you might have seen me play it on stream already. But yeah, as usual, gonna hop into some ranked games, ranked matches to show it in action. And yeah, so see you in a moment with match number 1. Stay tuned.